The slap echoed through first class like a gunshot. Louisa Smith, fiancée of Korean Mafia boss Andrew Clark, had just struck flight attendant Medline Hoare across the face. Hard. In front of 50 witnesses at 35,000 feet on Flight 442 from New York to Seoul. The reason? Medline spilled champagne on her white Chanel blouse during turbulence. Every passenger in rows 1 through 6 stopped breathing. The investment bankers, the tech CEOs, the man in 1A, Andrew Clark himself, who controlled half the illegal cargo moving through Asian airspace. But here's what nobody expected. Medline didn't cry. Didn't apologize. Didn't beg. She reached into her apron, pulled out a crisp white napkin, and handed it to Louisa to clean the stain. Her voice was steady, professional. "I apologize for the turbulence, ma'am." That's when Andrew Clark, a man who hadn't shown surprise in 15 years, set down his whiskey glass. His eyes locked on the flight attendant with the red handprint on her cheek and the spine that refused to bend. Because Medline Hoare wasn't just another service worker. She was a 26-year-old woman working 3 jobs to pay her sister's college tuition. She'd been awake for 19 hours. She'd lost her parents to the same system that was grinding her down. And she had nothing left to lose except her dignity. And she wasn't giving that up. Not for Louisa Smith. Not for anyone. You think you know where this goes? You don't. Hit like if you want to see what happens when a mafia boss realizes the most dangerous person on his plane isn't his rival's assassin. It's the waitress nobody noticed. Subscribe for part 2, where Medline enters a world of mid-air deals, poisoned passengers, and a conspiracy that will force her to choose between survival and selling her soul. Because what Andrew did in the next 60 seconds didn't just end his engagement. It recruited the one person who could save his empire, or destroy it. Nobody moved. A flight attendant 3 rows back stood frozen, her hand still gripping a wine bottle. A businessman in 3C had his phone halfway to his ear, call unmade. The cabin crew pressed against the galley curtain, watching. Louisa Smith was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her diamond rings catching the overhead lights. She expected tears, begging, the humiliation of watching this nobody crumble. But Medline just stood there, waiting, the napkin still extended in her hand. Andrew Clark leaned back in seat 1A. He studied Medline's face. The mark already darkening on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, the steel in her posture. Then he pressed the call button. If you're hooked and want to see how this power shift plays out, hit subscribe now. Part 2 is going to blow your mind, trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Medline steps into Andrew's world. 90 minutes after the slap, the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight crossing. Most passengers slept under thin airline blankets. But Louisa Smith sat rigid in 1B, gripping her phone like a weapon. Her thumbs moved frantically across the screen, texting, emailing, filing complaints. She was building her case. Getting Medline arrested the second they touched down in Seoul. Every time Medline walked past her row, Louisa's eyes followed. Burning. Waiting. Andrew Clark hadn't said a word. He sat in 1A reading financial reports on his tablet, his expression blank. He'd witnessed the slap, done nothing, said nothing. Medline figured that was it. She'd served champagne to a monster and gotten slapped by his fiancé. Just another day at 35,000 feet in a world that didn't care about people like her. But 3 hours into the flight, somewhere over Greenland, with nothing below but ice and darkness, Andrew stood up. He walked to the front galley, picked up the intercom handset reserved for crew announcements. And when he spoke, his voice filled every speaker in first class. Good evening. This is Andrew Clark in seat 1A. I'm addressing my fellow passengers to make a personal announcement. Heads lifted, eyes opened. The businessman in 3C paused his movie. I am terminating my engagement to Ms. Louisa Smith, effective immediately. Upon landing in Seoul, she will be escorted off this aircraft separately and barred from all future flights I charter, book, or occupy. The cabin exploded. Whispers. Gasps. Passengers leaning over seats to stare at Louisa, whose face had gone white. Her wine glass slipped from her hand. Bordeaux splashed across her lap, champagne in reverse. She shot to her feet, screaming. You can't do this. You can't humiliate me like this. I'll destroy you. 2 men in 2A and 2C stood simultaneously. Andrew's bodyguards. They didn't touch her, didn't speak, just stood. Louisa collapsed back into her seat, shaking. Tears streaked her makeup. Andrew returned to 1A. Pressed the call button. Medline appeared, her cheek still faintly marked, her hands trembling but her back straight. Andrew looked up at her. What would it take for you to work exclusively for me? Private charters, vetted passengers, triple your current salary. Medline's eyes flicked to Louisa, sobbing now, ruined, then back to Andrew. I need to think about it. You have 11 hours until we land, Andrew said. Use them wisely. Medline retreated to the rear galley. The plane hummed through the darkness at 550 miles per hour. Her mind raced faster. What had she just walked into? And more importantly, what was Andrew Clark really offering? Because men like him didn't hire flight attendants out of kindness. They hired them because they needed something. And whatever Andrew needed, it was dangerous enough that he'd just blown up his entire engagement in front of 50 witnesses to get it. 3 days later, Medline walked across the tarmac at Seoul's Gimpo Airport toward a Gulfstream that cost more than every house on her childhood block combined. She wore charcoal gray now instead of airline blue. A silver pin on her collar marked her as Andrews. The contract she'd signed paid $180,000 a year. Her first month's salary sat in her account. Her sister's tuition, paid in full the same day. Flight 67 to Tokyo. 7 passengers. 2 hours. Easy money. Andrew sat in his usual front seat, reading. 6 Korean and Japanese businessmen filled the rear cabin, expensive suits, Rolex watches, the kind of men who spoke in numbers with too many zeros. Medline's job was simple. Serve drinks. Prepare a light meal. Stay invisible. 40 minutes into the flight, the man in 4B started sweating. Park Jin-woo. Mid-40s. Nervous hands. He kept checking his phone even though they were at 38,000 feet with no signal. His water glass shook when he drank. Medline approached to collect his glass. Park grabbed her wrist. Hard. He pulled her close and whispered in rapid Korean, "Tell Clark the Tokyo shipment is compromised. Victor Chen knows. They're waiting at Haneda." Medline's heart slammed against her ribs. She nodded once, extracted her wrist, smiled professionally for the other passengers who weren't watching. She walked to Andrew's seat, leaned down like she was asking about his drink, whispered Park's message word for word. Andrew didn't look up from his tablet. Macallan 18, neat. Medline returned to the galley, poured the whiskey with shaking hands, brought it back. As she set the glass on Andrew's tray table, he murmured, "Watch Park. Don't let him leave his seat." 20 minutes before landing, Tokyo's lights spreading across the horizon like spilled diamonds, Park Jin-woo convulsed. His face went gray. He clutched his throat, made a sound like a drowning animal. Medline started toward him, but Andrew's bodyguard was already there, blocking her view, working fast, checking vitals. The bodyguard looked back at Andrew, shook his head once. Park vomited blood across the leather seat and collapsed sideways. Dead. The other passengers froze. One man half stood. Andrew's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "Sit down. We're landing in 8 minutes. This is a medical emergency. No one speaks of this. You'll all be compensated for your discretion." The plane touched down smooth as silk. Japanese medical personnel boarded, but Medline saw the truth in their eyes. They weren't paramedics. They were Andrew's. Park's body went into a sealed bag marked medical waste. The passengers filed off into separate cars. Each one got an envelope before they left. When the cabin emptied, Medline stood frozen by the galley. Park's blood still wet on the seat. Andrew turned to her. He was poisoned before boarding. "Someone wanted to ensure his message never reached me. This is the world you've entered. People don't retire from it. They die at altitude or on the ground." He paused. "Are you still in?" Medline's hands shook but her voice didn't. "Who killed him?" "Someone working with Victor Chen. Possibly someone on this airfield right now." Andrew adjusted his cufflinks. "I asked if you're still in." Medline looked at the blood. Thought of her sister in her dorm room in Chicago, safe, studying, not working 3 jobs like Medline had at her age. Thought of 6 more years serving champagne to people who'd never know her name. "I'm in," she said. "But I need to know what I'm protecting." Andrew studied her. Something in his expression shifted. Information, cargo, territory, power. In that order. He walked toward the aircraft door. "Welcome to Flight 67, Ms. Hoare." The first of many. Medline stood alone in the cabin with a dead man's blood drying on leather and a question burning in her mind. If Park was killed before boarding, that meant the killer knew he'd be on this flight. Which meant someone in Andrew's organization was feeding information to Victor Chen. And if Andrew knew that, and he did, she could see it in his eyes, then why had he let Park board at all? Was Park a test? Or was Medline? Medline wasn't supposed to be working Flight 129. She was deadheading, repositioning as a passenger for Andrew's next charter. She sat in the cockpit jump seat reviewing route maps when the first officer mentioned the business class cabin was packed today. Something made her ask to see the manifest. Row 15, Seat C, Lucy Shipman. The name meant nothing, but Medline had learned in Andrew's world that nothing was ever nothing. She walked through business class during boarding. Baseball cap pulled low, civilian clothes, invisible. The woman in 15C sat with her head down, reading a magazine. Medline's blood turned to ice. Louisa Smith. Different hair, dark brown instead of blonde. Minimal makeup, black sweater and jeans instead of Chanel. But the bone structure was the same. The way she held her phone. And there, on her wrist, the diamond tennis bracelet she was too vain to remove even when traveling under a fake name. Medline retreated to the rear galley. Told the working crew she was doing route research for a new position. Asked if she could observe from the back during the flight. They agreed. For 2 hours, Louisa did nothing. Slept, read, sipped tomato juice like a normal passenger. But as they approached Hong Kong airspace, Louisa disappeared into the lavatory. 7 minutes. Far longer than normal. When she emerged, Medline caught it immediately. Louisa's fingernails were bare. The red polish from boarding, gone. Scrubbed off mid-flight. In Andrew's world, Medline had learned that small details were everything. You don't change your appearance mid-flight unless you're meeting someone who can't see you as you were when you boarded. As the plane descended, Medline used the crew phone in the rear galley. Dialed Andrew's emergency number. Louisa Smith. Traveling as Lucy Shipman. Changed her appearance mid-flight. Landing in Hong Kong now. Andrew's response was immediate. Stay on her. Don't engage. Observe and report. At Hong Kong International, Medline followed from a distance. Through immigration. Baggage claim. Out to the arrivals hall where humidity hit like a wall. Louisa met a Chinese man in an expensive suit. Tall. Mid-40s. Eyes that scanned the crowd like a predator. They didn't embrace. Barely looked at each other. But as they walked side by side toward the taxi stand, Medline saw it. Louisa passed him a small envelope. Smooth. Practiced. Medline snapped photos from behind a pillar. Sent them to Andrew. Then headed to her shuttle for the charter terminal. Andrew's reply came as she cleared security. The man is Victor Chen's attorney. Well done. Flight 582 departs in 90 minutes. Board as scheduled. Medline stared at her phone. Victor Chen. The name Park Jin-woo had whispered before he died. The man Andrew had been hunting. And Louisa, humiliated, fired, dragged off Flight 442 in tears, was working with him now. This wasn't about a broken engagement. This was about revenge. And Medline had just stumbled into the middle of a war being fought at 40,000 feet, where the casualties disappeared into sealed bags and the battlefields were pressurized metal tubes with nowhere to run. The question wasn't whether Louisa would strike back. The question was when. And whether Medline would see it coming before the plane went down. The question hanging in Medline's mind, whether she'd become a target herself, got answered the moment she boarded Flight 582 in Hong Kong. The Gulfstream's cabin had been gutted and reconfigured. No individual seats, just a flying boardroom, leather chairs facing each other across polished walnut, satellite phones built into the walls, soundproofed bulkheads that turned the cabin into a vault at 41,000 feet. Andrew boarded with 4 men Medline had never seen. A Singaporean in his 60s with eyes like frozen mercury. A Korean built like a boxer, neck thick as a tree trunk. A Chinese businessman who moved with military precision, every step measured, every gesture controlled. A Japanese man in a suit so perfectly tailored it probably cost more than Medline's annual salary, wearing a watch with no wedding ring. These weren't business associates. These were Andrew's regional commanders. Men who controlled territories across Asia. Men whose meetings couldn't happen on the ground where surveillance was constant and borders meant jurisdiction. This was a tribunal at altitude. Medline served drinks as the plane climbed. The men spoke in a rotating mixture of English, Korean, Mandarin, Japanese, languages Andrew switched between like breathing. Medline caught only fragments, but she caught enough. There was a traitor. Someone feeding Victor Chen information. Someone with access to flight schedules, cargo manifests, passenger lists, security protocols. The Singaporean, Marcus Tan, spoke in English. The leak has airline access. Ground crew, baggage handlers, maybe a pilot. The Korean responded in Korean. Andrew translated for the group. Pilots are too visible. Too much scrutiny. Support staff. Someone invisible. The Japanese man looked directly at Medline as she refilled his water glass. Perhaps a flight attendant, he said in perfect English. They see everything, hear everything, and passengers treat them like furniture. The cabin went silent. Every eye turned to Medline. She didn't flinch, didn't spill a single drop. She finished pouring, set the pitcher down, and met the Japanese man's gaze head on. If I were the traitor, she said calmly, I would have let Park Jin-woo leave his seat on Flight 67. I would have delayed reporting what I saw in Hong Kong. And I certainly wouldn't be standing in this cabin right now, knowing what you're discussing. Andrew's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Ms. Hoare is correct, he said. The leak is someone who's been in our network much longer. Someone with established trust. Someone we haven't been watching closely enough. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Languages shifted. Voices rose and fell. By the time they landed in Singapore, 3 suspects had been identified. A cargo coordinator in Manila, a charter broker in Bangkok, a logistics manager in Seoul. All 3 would be tested within the week. As the men disembarked, Andrew asked Medline to stay. When they were alone, he said, "You handled that well." Most people would have panicked. Most people haven't been slapped in front of a cabin full of strangers and survived it, Medline replied. Andrew almost smiled. Fair point. He walked to the door, then paused. Flight 206 departs tomorrow. Singapore to Seoul. You'll have a passenger. Who? Someone Victor Chen wants badly enough to threaten your family to get to me. Andrew's eyes locked on hers. Your sister is being moved to a secure location as we speak. We'll discuss the details in the air. The door closed behind him. Medline stood alone in the empty boardroom, her hands finally shaking now that no one was watching. They'd gotten to Jasmine, and whatever was coming on Flight 206 wasn't a test anymore, it was a declaration of war. If you've made it this far, you're officially invested, and trust me, you need to see what happens next. Hit subscribe because the stakes just got personal, and what Medline discovers will change everything. Andrew's warning about a passenger on Flight 206 didn't prepare Medline for this. She boarded 2 hours early to prep the cabin, routine work, or so she thought. But someone was already sitting in 3A. Her younger sister, Jasmine. Medline's professional mask shattered. Jazz? What? How are you here? Jasmine looked terrified. Northwestern hoodie, jeans, backpack at her feet like she'd been snatched straight from campus. A woman came to my dorm yesterday, Jasmine said, voice shaking. Said she was from an airline recruiting program. Asked about you, where you're working, if you travel a lot, if we talk often. She was really pushy. Jasmine's hands twisted in her lap. Then this morning I got an email. Said I won a student travel experience prize. Free trip to Seoul. The ticket was already booked. A car picked me up and brought me here. Medline's blood turned to ice. She pulled out her phone. Texted Andrew. My sister is on the plane. This is a setup. Andrew boarded 30 minutes later. Saw Jasmine. Showed zero surprise. Took his seat in 1A like this was part of the plan. Once they reached cruising altitude over the South China Sea, he summoned both women to the conference area at the rear. Ms. Hoare, Andrew said to Jasmine, you're here because someone wants to send your sister a message. They wanted her to see that they can reach you anytime, anywhere. They wanted her to be afraid. Jasmine turned to Medline. What did you get involved in? Medline sat beside her sister. Took her hand. Explained carefully. She was working for someone powerful, someone who operated outside normal channels. People were trying to hurt him. They were using her family as pressure. But you're safe now, Medline said. You're on this plane. That means you're under his protection. Andrew nodded. You'll stay in Seoul for 3 days. Secure hotel, concert tickets, tourist sites, a proper vacation. But you'll have 2 bodyguards at all times. When you fly back to Chicago, you'll be on a commercial flight with a federal air marshal I've arranged. He looked at Medline. And you will finish what we've started. Jasmine was crying now. Can't you just quit? Can't you walk away? Medline squeezed her sister's hand. I'm already in too deep. The only way out is through. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Jasmine nodded, wiping her eyes. For the rest of the flight, Medline sat with her sister. Held her hand. Told her sanitized stories about beautiful destinations and interesting passengers. Nothing about Park Jin-woo vomiting blood. Nothing about Louisa meeting Victor Chen's attorney. Nothing about the conspiracy closing in around them. Just 6 hours of peace at 41,000 feet before the world got dangerous again. When they landed in Seoul, Jasmine hugged Medline so tight she could barely breathe. Please don't die, Jasmine whispered. I don't plan to, Medline whispered back. She watched her sister leave with the bodyguards, 2 men in dark suits who looked like they could stop bullets with their bare hands. Then she turned to Andrew. Flight 888. When is it? 3 days, Andrew said. And now they've shown their hand. They're desperate. That makes them dangerous, but also predictable. He walked toward the exit, then stopped. Victor Chen doesn't take hostages for negotiation, Ms. Hoare. He takes them for leverage. Your sister being here wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration. He's telling you that if you don't walk away, the next time you see Jasmine, it won't be on one of my planes. The cabin door closed behind him. Medline stood alone, staring at the empty seat where her sister had been. Victor Chen had just declared war. And the battlefield was Flight 888, a plane Medline would board in 72 hours, knowing that somewhere among the passengers would be people sent to kill Andrew Clark. The question was whether she'd spot them before they made their move, or whether she'd become collateral damage in a war she'd stumbled into by accident when Louisa Smith's hand cracked across her face in first class. 72 hours turned into 48, then 24. Then Medline was boarding Flight 771, just her and Andrew, heading to Taipei on what should have been a routine repositioning flight. The bodyguards stayed behind in Seoul. Coordinating security for Flight 888, Andrew said. Preparing for what was coming. The cabin felt wrong with only 2 people. Too quiet. Too intimate. 30 minutes into the flight, the plane hit turbulence over the Yellow Sea. Not the gentle bumps passengers ignore. The kind that makes overhead bins rattle and glasses slide across tables. The kind that drops the aircraft hundreds of feet in seconds. The seatbelt sign dinged urgently. Even Andrew gripped his armrests. His knuckles went white, and in the chaos of shaking metal and rattling glass, something in him broke open. My father died in a plane, Andrew said suddenly. Charter flight, Seoul to Jeju Island, 14 years ago. I was supposed to be on that flight. Medline, strapped into the jump seat across from him, said nothing. Just listened. My uncle planted a bomb in the cargo hold. Killed my father, my mother, 9 of my father's associates. Andrew's voice was flat, mechanical. I missed the flight because I had food poisoning. Spent the whole night vomiting in a hotel bathroom while my parents flew to their deaths. The plane shuddered, dropped again, felt like it was tearing apart. I've lived in the sky ever since, Andrew continued, barely audible over the rattling cabin. Learned to fly, got my pilot's license. Started conducting all my most important business at altitude. If I'm always moving, they can't plant a bomb. If I control the aircraft, I control the variable. He looked at Medline. I've spent 14 years in a flying cage because it's the only place I feel safe. The turbulence eased. The plane leveled out. Andrew released his grip on the armrests. Medline unbuckled, moved to the seat across from him. My parents worked at O'Hare Airport, she said quietly. My mom cleaned planes on the overnight shift. My dad was a baggage handler. 6 days a week, every week, trying to pay off medical debt from when I was born premature. She paused. When I was 16, my dad collapsed loading luggage onto a 747. Massive heart attack. Died on the tarmac. She looked out the window at the dark sea below. My mom lasted 6 months after that. Stroke. Stress-induced, the doctors said. I've been working in the sky ever since. Trying to make their deaths mean something. Trying to prove their daughter could be more than they were. Andrew was silent for a long moment. We're both orphans of this altitude, he finally said. Yes, Medline agreed. We are. The plane descended toward Taipei. City lights emerged from the darkness like stars scattered across black water. Flight 888 is tomorrow, Andrew said. Are you afraid? Terrified, Medline admitted. But I'm more afraid of who I'll be if I run. Andrew nodded. Then let's finish this. He stood, walked to the galley, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Medline. To orphans, he said. To survival, she replied. They drank in silence as the plane carried them toward Taipei, and toward Flight 888, the flight where Louisa Smith and Victor Chen would make their move, where 50 innocent passengers would become witnesses or casualties, and where Medline would have to choose between the woman who'd spent 6 years making herself invisible and the woman who'd stepped between a mafia boss and a knife without hesitation. The question wasn't whether she was ready. The question was whether anyone could be ready for what was coming at 40,000 feet with nowhere to run and no one to call for help. The answer to whether Medline was ready came at Taipei Taoyuan Airport, standing at the door of a Boeing 737 configured for VIP service as 50 passengers boarded Flight 888. 50 seats, all business and first class. The passenger manifest read like a Forbes list: tech CEOs, real estate moguls, a K-pop producer whose artists filled stadiums, the owner of a shipping empire, a former South Korean cabinet minister. Among them, carefully placed, 3 of Andrew's allies. And according to intelligence gathered over the past week, 5 of Victor Chen's operatives. Medline greeted each passenger with a professional smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she saw her. Row 8, boarding pass in hand, credentials identifying her as Laura Chen, executive assistant to Mr. David Park. Louisa Smith. Their eyes met. Louisa's face went white, then red. Rage bloomed across her features like blood in water. But she said nothing. Couldn't. Blowing her cover would end everything before it started. She walked past Medline without a word and took her seat. Andrew boarded last. Seat 1A. A titanium briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, the kind that supposedly contained documentation for a $200 million conflict diamond shipment currently sitting in a Seoul vault. Stones that Victor Chen had been hunting for 2 years. What Victor didn't know, the diamonds were sold 3 months ago to a Dubai buyer. The paperwork in that briefcase was fake. This entire flight was bait. Medline closed the aircraft door. Sealed it. 50 people locked in a metal tube about to climb to 40,000 feet. She moved to the front of the cabin to perform the safety demonstration. Her hands shook as she demonstrated the oxygen mask, the seat belt, the emergency exits. She caught Andrew's eye from the galley. He gave her the smallest nod. The trap was set. Flight 888 pushed back from the gate at 8:47 p.m. The engines spooled up. The plane rolled down the taxiway toward the runway, Taipei's lights spreading in every direction like a circuit board. Medline stood in the galley, watching the cabin. Louisa in 8C, staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched. The 5 operatives scattered throughout, 12B, 14A, 18C, 22B, 25A. She'd memorized their seat numbers, their faces, the way they moved. Andrew's 3 allies in 5A, 9C, and 16B. Ready. And 50 innocent passengers who had no idea they'd just boarded a plane where half the people weren't who they claimed to be, where a conflict was about to erupt at cruising altitude, where the flight attendant serving them drinks had 17 days of training in Andrew Clark's world and was about to become the difference between everyone landing safely or nobody landing at all. The plane turned onto the runway. The engines roared. Flight 888 accelerated, lifted off, climbed into a clear night sky. And somewhere in that cabin, Medline didn't know who, didn't know when, someone was going to make a move. The question was whether she'd see it coming, whether Andrew's counter plan would hold, or whether this Boeing 737 would become another tragedy at altitude. Another sealed bag. Another story that ended with silence and disappeared passengers and families who'd never know the truth about what happened in the sky. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The war had begun. 1 hour into Flight 888, the cabin had settled into civilized calm. Passengers enjoyed their meals, beef short rib or miso-glazed cod, paired with wine from the premium selection. Conversation hummed low, comfortable. Then the captain's voice crackled over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, due to air traffic control requirements, we're being rerouted through a southern corridor. This will add approximately 40 minutes to our flight time. We apologize for the inconvenience. In seat 12B, the man posing as a Japanese tech investor went rigid. His eyes flicked to his partner in 14A. This wasn't part of the plan. Louisa, in 8C, pulled out her phone. No signal this far over water. She looked toward the cockpit. Then toward Andrew in 1A. Something was wrong. The man in 12B unbuckled. Walked toward first class like he was heading for the lavatory. But as he passed Louisa's seat, he leaned down and whispered in Mandarin, "The route is wrong. We need to move now." Medline heard every word from the galley. Her Mandarin was basic, but she understood enough. Louisa stood abruptly, reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a ceramic knife. "Everyone stay in your seats." She screamed in English. Passengers gasped. A woman shrieked. The K-pop mogul hit the floor. But Andrew didn't move. He sat calmly in 1A, sipping his whiskey like this was dinner theater. "You should sit down, Ms. Smith," he said. "We're experiencing turbulence." On cue, the plane dropped. The seatbelt sign dinged urgently. Oxygen masks fell from overhead compartments. Passengers screamed as the aircraft plummeted what felt like thousands of feet in seconds. In the chaos, Andrew's 3 allies moved. Lethal, efficient, silent. They neutralized Victor's 5 operatives in 90 seconds flat. Sedatives injected, weapons confiscated, men zip-tied to their seats like cargo. Louisa lunged at Andrew with the ceramic knife. But Medline stepped between them. The blade sliced her left forearm. Cut clean through her uniform sleeve. Blood soaked the fabric, hot and wet. But Medline didn't drop. She grabbed Louisa's wrist with her right hand and twisted, strength built from years of lifting service carts and luggage in turbulence, from working triple shifts, from refusing to break. The knife clattered to the floor. Andrew's men restrained Louisa as she screamed, "You're nothing. You're just a waitress. You think you matter?" Medline, bleeding, looked Louisa dead in the eye. "I'm the nothing you never saw coming." The plane leveled out at 20,000 feet. The captain, one of Andrew's pilots, came over the PA, voice steady. "Apologies for that turbulence, everyone. We've stabilized. Medical personnel will attend to anyone who needs assistance." Andrew stood, addressed the legitimate passengers, confused, terrified, some still crying. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance. There was a security threat on this aircraft, which has now been neutralized. You will all be compensated for this experience, and I guarantee your complete safety for the remainder of the flight." One of Andrew's men, a former Korean Special Forces operator, moved through the cabin with a medic kit. Checking passengers, administering sedatives to the hysterical, providing blankets and reassurance. Louisa and the 5 operatives were moved to the rear of the aircraft. Secured, silent, the flight continued to Seoul. Medline stood in the galley, a makeshift bandage wrapped around her bleeding forearm, watching the cabin settle. Passengers were shell-shocked but alive. The threat was contained. The trap had worked. But as the plane hummed through the night sky, one question burned in Medline's mind. Victor Chen had sent 5 operatives and his former fiancée to take down Andrew Clark, and all 6 had failed. Men like Victor Chen didn't accept failure. They escalated. And if this was his opening move, what came next wouldn't be a knife at 40,000 feet. It would be something Medline couldn't see coming, something that would force her to choose between the life Andrew was offering and the sister waiting for her on the ground. Because men like Victor Chen knew that the best way to destroy someone wasn't to kill them. It was to make them watch everyone they loved die first. You've come this far, don't miss the ending. Hit subscribe now because what happens, this will leave you speechless. This is where everything Medline sacrificed either pays off or destroys her. Watch until the end. Victor Chen's next move never came. Because Flight 888 didn't land at Incheon International. It touched down at a private military airfield 40 kilometers south of Seoul, a place that didn't exist on civilian maps, where questions weren't asked and witnesses didn't talk. Korean authorities boarded. Men in dark suits who worked in Andrew's network. Not police. Not government. Something else entirely. The legitimate passengers were escorted off first. Each one handed a leather portfolio. Inside, $50,000 in cash and a non-disclosure agreement. They signed without reading, left without speaking. They would never mention Flight 888 again. Victor Chen's 5 operatives were removed in restraints. Loaded into unmarked vehicles. They would be questioned in rooms without windows. Then they would disappear. Louisa Smith was taken separately. Still screaming threats. Still hurling obscenities. Her voice faded as she was dragged across the tarmac, becoming smaller and smaller until she was nothing at all. When the aircraft finally emptied, only Andrew and Medline remained. She sat in 3A. Left forearm professionally bandaged by Andrew's medic. 17 stitches. The bleeding had stopped, but her arm throbbed with each heartbeat. Andrew sat across from her in 3B. Opened the titanium briefcase, not with the key on his wrist, but with a hidden biometric lock on the underside. Inside weren't diamond certificates, just documents, account numbers, property deeds, corporate registrations, passports. He slid one folder across to her. Your sister's tuition is paid in full. All 4 years, including housing. Your parents' outstanding debts have been cleared. He tapped another document. And this is a consulting contract. You'll work as my logistics coordinator and security analyst. Plan routes, vet passengers, identify threats, coordinate operations. No more serving drinks unless you choose to for operational cover. He paused. Salary is $400,000 annually, plus performance bonuses. Medline stared at the papers. Her hands, despite everything, were steady. Why? Because you proved something no one else has, Andrew said. That the most powerful position in any room, even at 40,000 feet, is the one everyone underestimates. You saw what trained operatives missed. You did what armed men hesitated to do. That's not luck. That's intelligence and courage. Medline looked out the aircraft window. The sun was rising over the mountains. Gold and pink streaking across the sky. She thought about her sister, safe in Chicago. About her parents, dead from a system that crushed them. About the woman she was 7 days ago, standing in first class with a red mark on her face and tears she refused to shed. That woman would have taken the money and run. This woman knew better. I accept, she said. But I have conditions. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Go on. I choose which flights I'm on. I'm never trapped in the sky with people I don't trust. And if you ever lie to me about the stakes, I walk. No notice. No discussion. Andrew considered this, then extended his hand. Agreed. They shook. Her grip was firm despite the pain in her bandaged arm. One more thing, Medline said. What happened to Louisa? Andrew's expression didn't change. She's being processed for her role in the conspiracy. Victor Chen will learn what happened to his assets. He'll understand that his reach doesn't extend into my airspace. And Louisa Smith will discover there are consequences for striking people who refuse to break. He stood, straightened his suit jacket. Welcome to the organization, Ms. Hoare. Your first assignment briefing is tomorrow at 0900 hours. I suggest you rest. As Andrew walked toward the aircraft door, Medline called out, Andrew. He turned. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Thank you, she said. For seeing me when no one else did. You made yourself impossible not to see, he replied. That's the difference between survival and power. He descended the air stairs. Medline sat alone in the cabin, watching the sunrise through the window, feeling the empty aircraft around her. She was no longer a victim of first-class cruelty. No longer invisible. She'd learned the most important lesson. Dignity isn't about accepting your place. It's about choosing where you stand, even at 40,000 feet, even when the whole world is watching, even when the only person who believes in you is yourself. Medline Hoare stood, collected her belongings, walked toward her new life. The plane, empty now, waited for its next flight. But as Medline stepped onto the tarmac, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your sister sends her regards. She's quite lovely in person. VC. Her blood ran cold. Victor Chen hadn't sent his final move on Flight 888. He'd been planning something else entirely. And whatever came next would make a knife at altitude look like mercy.